direction, because that's not part of Christianity. Another thing that he goes to finishes talking, and it's in the this idea about the Jewish practices, and I don't know why. I don't know where the Jews got this idea, but there was a practice among the Jews to worship angels, and I don't know anything. I don't know of any place in the Scripture that there's a precedent for worshiping angels. Exactly. That's certainly a negative example. Well, where is the positive example? Where's the instance of someone who worshiped an angel and God approved of it? Don? Yes. And and you might think about when the two angels accompanied the Lord to visit Abraham before they were dispatched down to Sodom and Gomorrah, and we know how that turned out. But I mean, Abraham dropped what he was doing and had Sarah bake him some cakes and spent time with him like that. But that's his hospitality. That was Middle Eastern hospitality in the long ago. There wasn't any worship involved in that. At least that I read in that. You could say, well, he treated him real well, but that he wasn't worshiping him. And if Jews started worshiping angels because of that instance in Genesis about Abraham, that's really, really stretching the point. Don't you think? That's really straining to try to make a point. That's not very good to begin with. And even as it was given here about the middle of page 68, this extra biblical reference here about the scene in heaven, which you have God's throne, and crowded around him are all the best angels. I mean, the best and most powerful angels. The angels whose mere presence is a worship to God, the archangels. And then surrounding all of those in the outer court, then there's all these messengers, these people that are standing by ready to get instructions, and they're the ones that get dispatched to and from earth. Where does that come from? I can't imagine what part of the Scriptures that made someone put together this. It's kind of a fanciful picture, and it's maybe got some appeal, but I can't. That's not a scriptural scene to me. Cynthia. Sure. And that's bam. That's the phrase. That's the thing to remember as we're studying this section. Keep in your mind Cynthia's phrase. People make up whatever they want. Whatever they feel like is a deficiency, they step into the void and they try to fill it with something. And it's made up. It's not provided to us. It's not part of what God gave us that he claimed. Not just the people writing it down. Not just the folks that came along after that, the church fathers. He claimed it's all sufficient to godliness. That the man of God would be perfect, thoroughly furnished to every good work. What is lacking? What's on the list that needs to be provided? Paul and then Chris. And if you adopted this hierarchy, Jesus is jumping a couple of ranks, isn't he? He's bypassing the angels and the archangels to get sit next to God. It's what his claim was, and it in fact was his claim because it was accurate. But and the Hebrew writer makes a point about that. He said, "Who among the angels has God said these things to?" That however much you think, and the Jews did, the law was ministered by angels. The angels helped to deliver the law and to deliver instructions to God's prophets and the people of God. That's in the historical record in the Old Testament. The angels played a non-insignificant part, a significant part rather. I mean, not say it in a double negative. The angels played a significant part in ensuring that God's will was delivered to man and that God's wishes were made known. They're not to be despised. They're not to be set apart. But there's no instance, no instructions about that they should be worshipped or how they ought to be worshipped. And I just don't know where they came up with this, why it became an issue, Chris and Mark. And there's a precedence for that too. But it does mean that they're in error, though. And they're like the Sadducees that came to Jesus with the hard problem about the brothers that kept dying and the widow that passed from brother to brother, and whose wife would he be in the afterlife? And Jesus' reply is, you err, not knowing the power of God, or the Scriptures, or the power of God. And that's where that comes from. That error comes from people not knowing the power of God, as is truly revealed. Exactly. They have a tragic misunderstanding of the Scriptures. Michael? Sure. And they don't even rank as high as that in that aspect as the apostles. They don't have the Spirit of God to the measure the apostles did, where the apostles, like Paul, could write, said, we have the mind of Christ, or we have the mind of God. And they wanted to know these things. They were part of revealing them, but they didn't understand them. They wanted to know. They desired to know the whole plan and to know what we know, but God didn't grant them that. But getting and the important part that they played in delivering the message, delivering God's word to his people, can't be undermined. And you say, well, yeah, you could maybe, worship the messenger. You could maybe understand that here's someone that's actually been in the presence of the being that I honor the most. Again, we come back to where's God's instructions that you ought to worship my messengers. My messengers are great. I picked them out. I handpicked them. They're doing my bidding. Good on them. But I never told you anywhere that you ought to treat them in any way like you think of and treat me. They're created. They're different from humans. This idea that you go to heaven and you get your harps and your wings and stuff. That's from the cartoons. That may be a mental picture that's useful to us and a nice thought, but whatever kind of creatures that they are, we're not really told. They're creation. Yeah, I'm sorry to tell you, but Hollywood is making stuff up. The Raiders of the Lost Ark isn't real either. So anyway, we digress. It's this idea that there's all these different ways to enhance your spirituality through these other practices is one that we should at least, in the broadest sense, keep an open mind. And keep that open mind that is being kept propped open by your study of the Scriptures. Like the Bereans, when someone brought new ideas to them, they studied the Scriptures to determine whether or not that they were accurate, whether or not they were true, whether they were part of God's will. That's the kind of open mind that we're supposed to have here. But we aren't supposed to be pulled away with every wind of doctrine, or like just tossed about like children, or bewitched by someone who comes along with something new and said, it's too bad you guys missed out on the whole story, but I'm here to fix you up. You ought to view that with a lot of skepticism and scrutiny, because the apostles, the one that the spirits are guiding, the ones that do have access to the mind of Christ, told you that they gave you the whole story. And it doesn't have to be propped up. It doesn't have to be, that's not the beginner steps. You got the whole story end to end. Todd? Exactly. And what works for you, if you're more spiritual, not drinking iced tea or staying away from coconut cream pie, good. I'm glad that that works for you. But you can't say, you could really be a good Christian if you would skip the dessert case. You aren't given the license to do that. You can't do that. It's not that, and it's not that these rules are useless. They're just not as useful as people are making them out to be. They may have some. This asceticism, this denial, this saying, I'm just going to eat food. I don't want to be overcome by my food addiction. I'm just going to eat the most basic nourishment I can so that I appreciate God's providing me nourishment and keeping me alive. Maybe that's going to work for you. That's the thing that you're going to focus on. Where do you think the flavor in the food came from? Why do you enjoy eating it so much? He built it in. That's not wrong. It's not bad that food tastes good. It's something that can be abused and draw us away from Christ. That's sure, just like everything. But denying yourselves of the pleasures that God put here for us to be able to enjoy, and it's okay. It's okay if we enjoy life here. Ecclesiastes says, that at the end of the day, if you worked hard and you're proud of your work and you've accomplished something, it's all right that you can enjoy that. You can go home and relax with your family and feel good, and that's in the rules. It's allowed. It is. It's appreciated. Now, if you make that the pursuit, you said, if you can't do this, then you're not serving Christ, we got a problem. Because Jesus didn't crank that in. Donnie? That's hard. That's hard, particularly if you found like if you were receiving this and you were saying, my closest friend is one of those guys that's been telling me about his visions. I think you need to first, I think, understand why it is that why that doesn't fit. That to the extent that you can, you may not be able to answer all of your questions. And I think that you shouldn't. The tendency is to avoid the conflict and smile and nod and say that's nice, when they tell you about your visions. But you might try exploring with them and saying, well, let's open the scriptures and show me about what these visions are supposed to do. How are we supposed to, in using the scriptures, how are we supposed to get to a place where visions like you're talking about help us to grow closer to Christ? And that's part of, and I'll get your comment in a moment here, Michael. And lots of rants this morning. Great. Appreciate your input and your comments, but we're wandering around a bit here. But a lot of what I thought about here in this particular lesson, and this is usually in the context of being explained as a marriage, is that when you have a spouse, you have two spouses, and they try to grow closer to God, they'll grow closer together. And if one, if they start out at different distances, as one grows closer to God, they'll grow closer to the spouse as well. And that we usually hear that in the context of a marriage, but it works among us too. That if you're trying to get closer to God, if Hazel's trying to get as close to God as she can in her life, and I'm trying to get as close to God as I can in my life, then I'm not going to be surprised bumping into Hazel there, am I? Which would be a treat. An unqualified treat, Hazel. But you understand, we can't be surprised if we encounter some of our familiar and favorite people as we grow closer to God. And that's not accidental. It's like, wow, who knew that would happen? That's the way it's supposed to work. And if we're all living like we know what we know, we can't be surprised if we grow closer together. And in fact, that's intentional. It's supposed to work that way. And if in your pursuit of your add-on, you're in fact not growing closer to other Christians, that ought to be a red light for you. That if in fact that what you're seeing as being a really important part of understanding my my role in Christ and living is with Christ in me and enjoying the freedoms that the scriptures afford to us that are associated with being citizens in the kingdom. And that's getting in the way if you're getting closer to other people, then we're the conundrum that Dottie just talked about, where we need to go back and tear our understanding down a little bit and put it back together and see if the parts all still fit. And it may be when you unpack all that luggage, it doesn't all go back in together. And there may be an association, there may be something about your relationship that is not going to help you move toward becoming closer together so long as that practice persists. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's crystals. It doesn't matter if it's the Malibu diet. It doesn't matter if it's essential oils. It doesn't matter if it's magnetism or astrology or whatever it is. If you're trying to couple it in with Christianity, it's out of place. And that it can work for you, Paul here, he kind of gives a kind of grudging nod to the saying here that when you submit the regulations in verse 20, verse 21, do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, all in the negative. It's not that there's no benefit in that. It's just not nearly as big as you think it is. And probably, it's temporal. Because these things are all about things that are temporary anyway. We may have fond memories of places that we went to eat or meals that we had with other people, or even the food. Maybe you can recall them and drool while you're trying to describe how good the cornbread was. Maybe it's that livid to you. But best case, it lives on in your memory, but best case, really the benefit from that food is long gone. And the same kind of thing with what we wear and what we drive, what we spend. It's temporary. Cynthia? Absolutely. And you have to do that. And not lose sight of this list that he put together also on page 73 of the things that we really need to keep in our minds all the time when we're dealing with each other, and just even when we're not thinking about anything else. These things ought to be nearby so we can think about them. About what really happens with baptism. It's not just this completely symbolic act. And the water truly, and this is the complaint that a lot of people have with it, has nothing to do with it. It's just tap water. Maybe heat it up a little bit. Maybe, it's just tap water. There's no power in the water. The power is in the obedience, and the power we get access to that power through our obedience. But what really happens, that all the regeneration, all of God's work that He does for us, in knitting us back together and making us fit citizens of the kingdom and destroying the enmity between us, we're just along for the ride. We don't do anything to get that. God does all that for us. And making us a new creature, we have a part to play in agreeing to be a new creature and striving toward that, but that's God's operation. And to the extent that you keep, and particularly with these asceticisms and such, they tend to be focused around, what you're doing and how austere you're living and such. It's almost as though you're trying to earn points. You think about denying yourself. I'm only going to wear cotton. I don't want to. I want to be pure in that. I'm just going to wear cotton. Okay, I guess that's all right. But how is that going to help spiritually? Is it really going to put you closer to Christ? If that works for you, then I got to say that maybe that's something you should explore. But I can't see how it works. What does the fibers of your clothes, or the cut of your clothes, or what does anything about that have anything to do with your spirituality in Jesus? And that's the thing that we have to measure. And to some of these folks that are doing these supplement things, it actually starts chasing these physical properties that may have some physical benefits, but no spiritual benefits. And it's just cataloging, these are the things, this is my sufferings for Jesus. I don't eat salt. I don't eat white flour. I don't wear I only wear cotton. I stand all day. Whatever you add to the list, understand that it may just be a physical benefit associated with that. And if in marshaling your physical manifestation, the managing your animal portion works for you and getting closer to Christ, that's a happy coincidence. That's not the requirements that Jesus had, though. Whatever it is, that the example of the apostles, whatever it is, I won't be enslaved to anything. I'm not going to let anything master me. There's precedent for that. But how you pursue that is certainly going to make a difference. Tim? Scruple's a good word. Absolutely. And really the measure of anything at the end of the day, no matter what, if it's a medical practice, if it's physical, the dietary practice and such, I think, do have to hold that up to the light and say, how does this fit in with Christ and me? Is this something that Jesus did as an example? And we can't do all the things that Jesus did because we're not Christ. We're not Christ on earth. We don't have his power. We don't have his wisdom. We don't have the knowledge. We can't do everything that Jesus did. But as Jesus did something as a practice, it's like the folks at the time said, the Jews are always fasting, and John's guys are always fasting, but your guy eats like a glutton. Right? That was the charge that they laid at his feet. Well, Jesus said, I know what matters. I understand what I can do, what I can't do, and who I can associate with. Behave like me. First, understand it, and then behave like you know it. That's where we started, and that's really where we're ending up. We'll continue next week. Good way to wrap. Way to show me the door.